Hello and welcome to this new chapter wavetable of Ableton Live 10. The instrument wavetable is here in Instruments Wavetable. We double click it and it opens here. This instrument is one of the new features of Ableton Live 10 and it is a very powerful instrument. Okay, now we are going to see how this instrument works. All these windows that we have here, if I press this button, they will open up here. So now the instrument is fully opened. Okay, up here we have these three oscillators, the sub, the oscillator 1 and the oscillator 2, that correspond with this part here, the sub, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. In this section we have the filter frequency, which is this one here. And here in this section we have these three tabs. In this first one we have the amp, two envelopes and two LFOs that correspond to these ones here. The amp, two envelopes and the two LFOs. And these two tabs, the matrix and the MIDI, join here in just one control panel. Okay, this instrument is composed of oscillators, envelopes, LFOs, and filters, and all of them working together at the same time. Okay, now we are going to see in more detail how each of these parts work. Up here we have these three oscillators, the oscillator 1, the oscillator 2, and this small oscillator, where we can adjust the gain, the tone, lower 1 or 2 octaves, and adjust the transpose in semitones. So now we could work with one oscillator, with two, or with all three oscillators at the same time. Okay, now we are going to have a look at how this oscillator 1 works. Here we have the volume, here we have the left-right panning of the speakers, and here we can choose one of these waveforms. And depending on which type we select, now we can choose one of these new options here. We can test any of these options one by one, but if we want to test them faster, we can do it just by pressing these buttons here. As you can see, this one goes forward and this other one goes back. And with this slider, we can raise or lower the position of the wave. Okay, here we can see the waveform in two different ways. We can see it linear or circular. To do that, I minimize the screen, and now here I can choose between linear or circular. The final sound will not be affected. The only thing that changes is how we see it. Okay, here we can adjust the oscillator's transpose in semitones. And here, the detune in cents. Okay, here we can choose one of these effects. We can choose non, FM, classic, or modern. As you can see, depending on which effect we choose, these parameters here will also change. And the same explanation will apply to the oscillator too. So, we have seen these three oscillators up here that correspond to this section. Okay, here we are going to see how this frequency filter works. It is a normal frequency filter where here we can select the low pass, the high pass, the band pass, the notch, and the morph. And depending on which type of filter we select, we can choose any of these types of circuits. Okay, here we can choose the filter's slope. And here we have the frequency and the resonance. It is like a normal filter, except that it has two filters. So now we can decide if we want to work with the first filter, with the second, or with both of them at the same time. And here we can select how these filters will be connected. It could be in series, in parallel, or in a split. And depending on how they are connected, the final sound will also be affected. Okay, in this section here, we have these three tabs. In this first one, we could adjust the envelopes and the LFO's modulation. In this second one, we could adjust the matrix modulation. And in this third one, we could adjust the MIDI's modulation. Here in this first tab, we have the amp, two envelopes, and two LFOs. As you can see, they are these ones here, the amp, the two envelopes, and the two LFOs. And if we want to make them bigger, we just click up here and drag it down. So now we could adjust their values in more detail. As you can see, the amp and the envelopes, we can adjust the attack, the decay, the sustain, and the release. If we select the slope, Here we could adjust the transition lines. So that they could be straight or curved. And here at value, we could adjust the initial, the peak, and the final values. Okay, here in the LFOs, we can also adjust the attack. And here we can decide how it will synchronize with our sound, so that it could be in hertz or with our tempo. And we could adjust both options here in the rate. And here we can choose the type of wave of the LFO. Here in the amount, we could adjust the amount of LFO's modulation. Here in shape, we could adjust the shape of the wave. And here in offset, we could adjust the beginning of the wave. Okay, and the LFO2 can be set up in the same way as the LFO1. Okay, now we are going to see the matrix and the MIDI. The matrix and the MIDI are tables where we can assign values. And as you can see, if we expand the instrument, both tables will join together into one table. Okay, let's see how they work. As you can see, here on this side, we have our target, where we have the amp, the pitch, and the oscillator 1 position. This one here. As you can see, if I select the oscillator 2 position, it will also change here. And as you can see, if I choose any other parameter, it will change here too. And now with these parameters, the amp, the envelopes, the LFOs, and the MIDI values, we could add or remove values to our target. Let's look at this example. I select the oscillator 1 position, and now changing the values of these parameters, the final result of our target will also change. Okay, and here we have the time. With this parameter, we could adjust the global modulation time of the envelopes and the LFOs. And with the parameter amount, we could adjust the global modulation amount of the envelopes and LFOs. Okay, and here in this side, we have these global parameters. Here we have the volume. Here we can choose between mono and poly. It means one voice or several voices. If we select mono, here with the glide slider, we could adjust the transition time between notes. And if we select poly, here we can choose the maximum number of notes that we could play at the same time. For example, if I select mono, and here if I press these 3 notes, we will only hear one note. But if I select poly, and here I select 3, now by pressing the same 3 notes, we will hear the 3 notes. Okay, here we can choose the type of unison that will be applied to the instrument. Here at voices, we could adjust the maximum number of oscillators that could play at the same time. And here in amount, we could adjust the amount of unison that will be applied to the instrument. As you can see, this is a really powerful instrument. However, I recommend that you just try and play with all these options until you become familiar with them. And this is the end of this chapter wavetable of Ableton Live 10. I hope you found this chapter useful and interesting. See you in the next one.